They had every advantage. A million-man army, some ancient sources claim, though modern historians place the figure far lower, between 200,000 and 300,000. They commanded the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. They had gold, ships, cavalry, and the absolute authority of a god-king behind them. And yet, at a narrow mountain pass on the coast of ancient Greece, they were stopped. Not for an hour, not for a day. For 3 days, a force so small it barely constituted an army held the entire Persian war machine in place. What happened at that pass, and what one Spartan king knew that nobody else did, will take your breath away. To understand the battle that changed Western civilization, you must first understand the world that made it inevitable. It is the early 5th century before the Common Era. The Mediterranean world is not yet the world of empires as we imagine them. It is a world of city-states, of rival powers jostling for dominance across islands, coastlines, and mountain valleys. Greece is not a nation. It has never been a nation. It is a collection of fiercely independent polis, city-states, each with its own laws, its own gods, its own army, its own pride. Athens is the great experiment, a city where democracy, imperfect, limited, but revolutionary, is beginning to flower, where philosophers walk in the open air, debating the nature of justice and beauty, where ships crowd the harbor at Piraeus, carrying grain, olive oil, and ideas across the known world. Sparta is something else entirely, something harder, something older. A city-state in the southern Peloponnese that has built itself into a weapon of war. Every male Spartan citizen begins military training at the age of 7, torn from his family and placed in the agage, the brutal educational system that breaks boys and remakes them as warriors. By the time a Spartan man earns the title of warrior, he has survived years of deliberate hunger, deliberate cold, deliberate pain. He has been taught that retreat is shame, that death in battle is glory, that the highest honor a Spartan woman could bestow upon her son was handing him his shield and saying, "Come back with it, or on it." These two cities, Athens and Sparta, are rivals in almost every way, in culture, in values, in politics. And yet both are about to face a threat so enormous that their rivalry will become secondary. Because to the east, something unprecedented is stirring: the Achaemenid Persian Empire. By 480 BCE, it is the largest empire the world has ever seen. Stretching from the Indus Valley in the east to the borders of Egypt in the west, from the steppes of Central Asia in the north to the scorching deserts of Arabia in the south. Its ruler is Xerxes I, son of Darius the Great, and Xerxes is not merely a king. In Persian imperial theology, he is the representative of Ahura Mazda on earth, a divine monarch whose authority admits no challenge, no equal, no defiance. His father Darius had already attempted to bring Greece under Persian control. In 490 BCE, a Persian expeditionary force landed on the plain of Marathon, northeast of Athens. The Athenians, astonishingly, defeated them. The Battle of Marathon was not just a military outcome. It was a humiliation. An empire that owned the world had been turned back by a single Greek city-state. Darius began planning his revenge. He never lived to carry it out. He died in 486 BCE, leaving the task to his son. Xerxes inherited not just a throne, but a grudge. And Xerxes had the resources to do something about it. For 4 years, Xerxes prepared. He gathered armies from every corner of his empire: Medes, Assyrians, Indians, Ethiopians, Egyptians, Lydians, Bactrians. He built a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe. He cut a canal through the peninsula of Mount Athos to protect his fleet from storms that had wrecked Persian ships once before. This was not an expedition. This was a statement. Xerxes was not coming to conquer Greece. He was coming to erase it. And somewhere in Sparta, a king named Leonidas was watching. He knew what was coming. He had known for months. The oracle at Delphi had already spoken, words so dark, so specific, that they left little room for hope. What Leonidas decided to do with that knowledge, and why, is a question historians have debated for 2,500 years. And the answer, when you understand it fully, is far more extraordinary than the legend. The oracle at Delphi had not been encouraging. When the Greeks sent their messengers to consult the Pythia, the priestess through whom Apollo was said to speak, she delivered a prophecy that shook them to their foundations. According to Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian whose histories remain our primary source for these events, the oracle told the Spartans that one of two things must happen. Either Sparta must fall, or one of her kings must die. It was not a prediction, it was a choice. Meanwhile, across the Greek world, the news of Xerxes' advance was generating panic. City-states that had prided themselves on independence were calculating the odds and making very different decisions. Many chose to submit, to offer Xerxes earth and water, the traditional Persian symbol of surrender. Historians call these states the Medizers, those who sided with the Medes. Thebes, one of Greece's most powerful city-states, Medized. Much of northern Greece followed. The calculation was cold and not entirely irrational. Persia was enormous. Greece was fractured. What realistic chance did resistance have? But in the spring of 480 BCE, a coalition of Greek states, led by Sparta on land and Athens at sea, made the decision to fight. They called a congress at Corinth. They argued, bickered, and threatened to withdraw. Greek unity has never been easy. Eventually, a plan emerged. They would find a defensible position and hold it long enough for the Greek fleet to engage and destroy the Persian navy. Without his ships to supply and support him, Xerxes' massive land army would become a liability. It would starve. It would fragment. The position they chose was a narrow coastal pass between the mountains of central Greece and the Malian Gulf. In Greek, the name of that pass was Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, named for the sulfurous hot springs that bubbled along its edge. At its narrowest point, the pass was barely 15 meters wide. 15 meters. That was the entire width of the battlefield where the fate of the Western world would be decided. In that constricted space, Persian numbers would mean almost nothing. Cavalry was useless. Archers had limited angles of fire. The only thing that would matter was whether the men holding that narrow line could hold it long enough. And in the late summer of 480 BCE, King Leonidas of Sparta marched north with his force. The number he brought is itself a source of debate. According to Herodotus, he led 300 Spartan warriors, the elite of the Spartan warrior class, men who had already fathered sons and whose deaths would therefore not extinguish their family lines. He also brought several thousand allied Greek troops from Thespiae, Corinth, Arcadia, and other city-states. But history has always remembered the 300, because Leonidas, it seems, already knew what the oracle had told him. He knew what was coming, and he went anyway. That morning, as the Greek force took its position at the Hot Gates, scouts reported what lay behind the mountains to the north. Stretching back as far as the eye could see, further than the eye could see, was the Persian army. The ground shook with their marching. The dust they raised could be seen from miles away. What nobody in the Greek camp could know yet was that a local resident named Ephialtes had already sought an audience with the Persian king. And what he told Xerxes that night would determine everything. The first day. Before a single blow was struck, the psychological war had already begun. Xerxes sent a scout to observe the Greek position. According to Herodotus, the scout reported something remarkable back to the king. The Spartans at the entrance of the pass were exercising, calmly. Some were combing their long hair, preparing for battle as though it were a ritual, as though death were a ceremony. Xerxes reportedly laughed. His advisors did not. Demaratus, a former Spartan king who had defected to Persia and now served as an advisor to Xerxes, warned the great king. "These men," he said, "are not performing for your benefit. This is what they do before every battle. When Spartans dress their hair, they are preparing to die or to kill. There is no third option." Xerxes waited 4 days. He sent messengers demanding surrender. He offered the Greeks an opportunity to lay down their weapons and be resettled elsewhere in his empire. Leonidas's reply, according to ancient tradition, was 2 words: Malin laid. "Come and take them. On the fifth day, Xerxes ran out of patience. He sent in his first wave, Medes and Scythians, elite troops, not cannon fodder, but not the best the empire had to offer. The result was catastrophic. For Persia, imagine you are that Persian soldier. You have marched halfway across the known world. You have been told this is a punitive expedition against a minor barbarian people. You have been told it will be over in days. And now you are running toward a wall of bronze shields, 8 feet tall, locked together in a formation so tight that the man beside you cannot raise his sword without hitting you in the face. The Spartan phalanx was not merely a military formation. It was a machine. Each warrior carried a shield designed not just for his own protection, but to protect the man to his left. The spear was 8 feet long, designed to kill from behind that shield wall before the enemy could get close enough to use his own weapons. And unlike the Persians, who used a shorter spear and lighter wicker shields, the Spartans fought in heavy bronze armor on ground so narrow that Persian superior numbers were entirely negated. The Medes broke. Xerxes sent in his immortals next, the 10,000 elite household troops of the Persian king, warriors famous throughout the ancient world for their discipline and ferocity. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were the finest soldiers in the empire, recruited specifically to number exactly 10,000 at all times, replacing casualties immediately so that their number never diminished. They were called immortal because they could not be killed as a unit. They could be killed at Thermopylae. The immortals attacked. The Spartans used a tactical deception. They feigned retreat, drawing the immortals forward into a broken formation, then wheeled and slaughtered them. By the end of the first day's fighting, Persian casualties numbered in the thousands. Greek casualties were minimal. What nobody tells you is that the Spartans were not the only Greeks fighting that day. The Thespians, warriors from the city of Thespiae, fought alongside them with equal courage and equal discipline. History remembers the 300 Spartans. But approximately 700 Thespians also stood in that line. They receive a fraction of the glory. They deserve far more. The second day followed the same pattern. Xerxes threw everything he had at the pass. The Greeks, rotating their contingents to manage fatigue, a tactically brilliant decision, historians believe, as different city-state units replaced each other to keep fresh warriors at the front, held firm again. Every Persian assault broke against that narrow line. But here is what the history books leave out. The Greek position was not impregnable. It never had been. There was a path through the mountains, a goat track called the Thermopylae path, that wound up behind Mount Calidromos and emerged directly behind the Greek position. If the Persians found that path and used it, the defenders at Thermopylae would be surrounded. Leonidas knew about it. He had stationed a contingent of 1,000 Phocian troops on the path to guard it. Then came Ephialtes, a local Greek from Malice, motivated by what Herodotus simply calls a desire for reward, went to Xerxes. He knew the path. He offered to guide the Persian immortals through it under cover of darkness. Xerxes accepted immediately. That night, as the Greek commanders celebrated 2 days of extraordinary success, 20,000 Persian immortals were already moving through the mountains. When the Phocian guards heard them coming, they grabbed their weapons, formed up in panic, and were scattered by a volley of Persian arrows before the immortals simply walked past them toward the rear of the Greek position. A Greek runner brought the news to Leonidas at dawn. The pass was turning. They were surrounded. What followed was a council. The Greek allied commanders gathered and debated. Retreat was still possible. The path north was not yet fully blocked. If they moved immediately, most of the Allied force could escape and fight another day. Several contingents did exactly that, and they were not cowards for it. They were soldiers making rational tactical decisions. The Greek world would need soldiers in the battles ahead, but Leonidas did not retreat. He sent the Allied forces south. He kept the 300 Spartans. He kept the 700 Thespians. The Thespians, crucially, were not ordered to stay. They chose to stay. Their city of Thespiae lay directly in the Persian path of advance, and they knew that if the pass fell, their city would be destroyed, which it was, but they chose to stay anyway. Imagine you are one of those 700 Thespians. You are not a professional soldier trained from birth for this moment. You are a citizen warrior. You have a trade, a family, a house. And you are choosing to stand here because the alternative, to live in a world where your city is ash, is worse than death. The final stand was ferocious. On the third morning, knowing the trap was closing, Leonidas led his remaining force forward, out into the slightly wider section of the pass, in a final offensive push. This was not passive defense. This was aggression. They killed as many Persians as they possibly could before the end. Leonidas himself died in the fighting. According to Herodotus, the battle over his body was intense, the Persians desperately wanting to capture or display the corpse of the fallen king, the Spartans fighting to protect it. 4 times the Persians drove back the Greeks. 4 times the Greeks countercharged and reclaimed the body. The end came when the Persian immortals arrived at the rear. The surviving Greeks, a small knot of Spartans and Thespians, retreated to a small hill near the pass and fought there. They fought with spears until the spears broke. They fought with swords until the swords broke. They fought with their hands and their teeth. Then the Persian archers moved forward, and it ended in a storm of arrows. Thermopylae had fallen. Xerxes had his pass, but he had paid a price that, by some ancient estimates, ran into the tens of thousands. And something had shifted in the Greek world that could not be quantified on a casualty list. The Persians had won the battle, but what they had created, what they had accidentally given the Greeks, was something far more dangerous than any army. They had given them a reason to believe they could win the war. There is a moment in Simonides' famous epigram, written to commemorate the fallen, that strips everything else away. You may know the words. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Simonides, the greatest lyric poet of the ancient Greek world, chose not to write about glory or heroism. He wrote about obedience, about duty, about men who died not because they wanted to, but because their world demanded it of them. The 300 Spartans who died at Thermopylae were not anonymous warriors. They were known men, named men. Herodotus records them. Alpheus and Maron, brothers, sons of Orsifantus. Dionysus, said to be the bravest of all. When someone told Dionysus that the Persian arrows were so numerous they would darken the sun, he reportedly smiled and said, "Then we shall fight in the shade." That line has been repeated for 25 centuries, but behind the famous quip was a man, a real man who woke up that morning knowing he was going to die, who ate a last meal, who perhaps thought of someone he loved, who picked up his shield anyway. Imagine you are that soldier. Not a legend, not a statue, a person. Your hands are calloused from 20 years of weapons training. Your body carries the scars of the Agage, the training system that broke you and rebuilt you. You have been taught your entire life that this moment, this exact moment, is what you were made for. Does that make it easier, or does it make it harder? Then pull back to the wider picture, because what's often forgotten is the cost borne by those who survived. The Greek allied soldiers who retreated south carried with them the knowledge that they had left men behind. Among the survivors, according to Herodotus, there was a Spartan named Aristodemus. He had been suffering from a severe eye infection. He was effectively blind in one eye, and Leonidas had sent him back before the final stand. Aristodemus returned to Sparta. He was not punished, but he was ostracized. Not officially, informally, socially. No Spartan would give him fire from their hearth or speak to him. They called him Aristodemus the Trembling, not because anyone accused him of cowardice, but because he was alive and the others were not. In Sparta, that was almost the same thing. He spent the next year living under that shadow. Then, at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, he died charging into the Persian lines with a ferocity that even his enemies admired. Herodotus wrote that he performed the greatest deeds of any Greek at Plataea, but the Spartans refused to give him any special honor. He had been trying to die, they said, to escape his shame. A man who fights to die is not brave. He simply has less to lose. The families back in Sparta received news by messenger. In the tight, controlled world of Spartan society, grief was not permitted to be public. Spartan women were expected to hear the news, receive it without tears, and ask only one question: did he die with honor? That was the official story, the cultural norm. But people are not cultural norms. Behind those stone faces and straight backs were mothers who had given up their sons at age 7, wives who had built entire lives around a man who came home only occasionally, children who barely knew their fathers. Among the Persian dead was a general named Mardonius, who would survive Thermopylae and lead Persian forces for another year. Among his soldiers were men conscripted from 24 nations who had no particular quarrel with Greece. Men who marched because a king god had commanded them to march. Men who died in a narrow coastal pass thousands of miles from their homes for reasons they may not have fully understood. Their names are almost entirely lost to history. The victors record the victors. The rest are silence. There is one name, however, on the Persian side that history did not forget: Ephialtes, the man who showed the Persians the mountain path. He collected his reward and disappeared into history until the Greeks began hunting for him. He fled to Thessaly. A price was put on his head. He was eventually killed, though Herodotus notes that the man who killed him did so for an unrelated dispute, not for the betrayal. Was Ephialtes a traitor? By Greek standards, certainly. By Persian standards, he was a local informant providing intelligence. By the coldest historical standard, he was a man who made a calculation, as thousands of Greeks did in that year, about which side was going to win. He was wrong about the long game, but nobody could have known that yet. The story of Thermopylae does not end with the last warrior fallen. It ends, or rather, it refuses to end, with a question that nobody who stood in that pass on the final morning could answer. Did it matter? Did 3 days of resistance by a few thousand men actually change anything? The answer to that question is waiting, and it is extraordinary. Within weeks of Thermopylae, the Persian army swept south through Greece. Athens was evacuated. The great city, the birthplace of democracy, was abandoned to the enemy. Xerxes entered it and burned the Acropolis. For the Athenians watching from the island of Salamis, it must have seemed like the end of the world. And then the sea changed everything. At the naval battle of Salamis, in September 480 BCE, the Athenian admiral Themistocles lured the Persian fleet into the narrow strait between the island of Salamis and the Attic coast, the same strategic logic that had governed Thermopylae, and destroyed it. The Persian fleet, unable to maneuver in the confined waters, was wrecked by the faster, more agile Greek triremes. Xerxes watched from his golden throne on a hillside above the strait. He had had the throne placed there specifically to observe his victory. Instead, he watched his fleet burn. According to ancient accounts, he reportedly tore his robes in grief. Without his fleet to supply his massive land army, the strategic picture had transformed overnight. Xerxes retreated to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius to continue the campaign with a reduced force. The following year, at the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, the Greek land forces, this time with Sparta's full army, led by the regent Pausanias, defeated Mardonius decisively. The general died in the battle. The Persian threat to Greece was over. But here is what the history books leave out about Thermopylae's role in all of this. The 3-day delay at the pass was not simply symbolic, it was operationally critical. Historians believe it gave the Greek fleet time to regroup, resupply, and find its position at Artemisium and then Salamis. It disrupted Xerxes' timetable. It forced a late-season naval engagement in conditions that favored the Greeks. 3 days. In a campaign of hundreds of miles, 3 days was the margin between victory and extinction. What nobody tells you is that the legend almost didn't survive in the form we know it. For much of the ancient world, Thermopylae was remembered as a military failure. It was Salamis and Plataea that Greeks celebrated as the victories that saved them. Thermopylae became the legend it is today largely because of Herodotus, because one man wrote it down with the narrative skill of a storyteller who understood that defeat, when clothed in the right choices, can be more powerful than victory. The Persian Wars left Greece transformed. Athens emerged from them as the dominant naval power in the Aegean, funding an empire built on the tribute of former allies. The great age of Athenian democracy, philosophy, and art, the age of Pericles, Socrates, Sophocles, and the Parthenon, was financed directly by the wealth generated from Persian war victory. Without Thermopylae, without Salamis, without Plataea, none of it happens. And Sparta? Sparta won its moment of immortality at Thermopylae and then spent the next century slowly consuming itself. The rigid system that had produced the 300, that had made those men into what they were, also prevented Sparta from adapting to the changing Greek world. By 371 BCE, less than a century after Thermopylae, Sparta was defeated by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra. The great warrior city never fully recovered. The 300, in a sense, were the apex, the finest expression of what the Spartan system could produce, and simultaneously the system's obituary. Today, the Thermopylae Pass looks nothing like it did in 480 BCE. Centuries of silt deposits have pushed the coastline back. What was once a 15-meter defile between mountain and sea is now a broad, flat plain. The hot springs still bubble. The monument to the fallen still stands. And, carved on it, are the words Simonides wrote 25 centuries ago. "Go tell the Spartans." Those words have echoed through every century since. They appeared in the mess halls of the Alamo. They were quoted by Winston Churchill. They have been painted on the walls of embattled cities from the ancient world to the modern one. Because what Thermopylae offers is not a lesson about tactics or strategy or military organization. It offers something rarer. It offers the image of people who looked at impossible odds and decided that how you face those odds matters more than whether you survive them. Was it worth it? 300 Spartan lives, 700 Thespian lives, the lives of hundreds of allied Greeks. Were they worth 3 days at a mountain pass? 2,500 years later, we are still asking the question. Which means, in the way that matters most, the men who stood at the hot gates are still standing there. The world they died to protect. The idea of free peoples who choose their own laws, their own leaders, their own fate, is the world we still inhabit, imperfectly, incompletely, but recognizably. And somewhere in the lineage of every democracy that has ever stood against a force that told it to kneel and be grateful for the mercy, somewhere at the root of every resistance, every last stand, every refusal to simply submit to the larger power, because the mathematics of survival demanded it, somewhere in all of that, you will find 15 meters of Greek coastline and 300 men who comb their hair.